So I can't sleep. I have to go work my other job in 4 hours. And I've been scripting this video for a while to try and condense it, to like try and get it under 30 minutes. Because my druid video went on for longer than 30 minutes. But fuck it. Here we are. So I want to talk about Barbarian. Barbarian's the next class on the list. Now, from the previous video I explained, if you didn't watch that, I said Rogue is pretty much like the #1 class in the game, and I don't play Rogue. And the #2 class in the game is going to be the Druid. Because the Druid combines versatility with good core gameplay design. And a lot of people say that Barbarian is just this broken, best class in the game, that Barbarian is really good, it's really strong, and my playthrough from Barbarian was always a little bit different than that. It swings very wildly on the pendulum between very good to very bad. But it was in that boat for all three of the other classes that weren't my 1-2. Like, Rogue is #1. Rogue is just broken because there's 3 separate builds for it that you can run with minimal legendary aspects and just 1 through 70 in a day or so with minimal legendary aspects. I just keep mentioning that. And Druid, which requires a bit more legendary aspects to be viable, but it's still pretty good. Well, Barbarian on paper seems like it's the best class in the game, but Barbarian to me has a lot of glaring weaknesses, but it also has some strengths that the more I play, particularly this character. This Barbarian right here was my worst Barbarian build. I was trying to make a walking arsenal Barbarian. I was trying so hard to make this Barbarian viable for walking arsenal. And I finally realized something with Barbarian that makes... Barbarian is the best and the worst class in the game for one particular reason. There's one thing. It's going to be kind of hard to explain, so I'm going to try and keep this simple. If you want to look at if you want to look at all of the skills in the game, you can divide them into 5 categories. Only 4 of them really matter, but for the 5. So you have basic skills. Basic skills are either skills that build your resource or are spam fallback options while things are on cooldown, when you're out of resource. It's something that is available to you, right? You have your core skills, which are resource or cooldown based skills that deal damage. Their main purpose is dealing bulk damage. That's a core skill. You have defensive skills, which I'll explain in a little bit. Utility skills. So every character has these 2 trees right here where the game design is you're supposed to take one of each of these skills, right? You're supposed to, for your 6 skills. These 2 categories right here are what I would call your utility skills. Now, obviously, there are skills like Kick is basically a core skill. You have something like Warcry, which is basically a defensive skill. I would call these utility skills. These are supposed to be your utility skills, where the primary purpose of these skills right here is they're supposed to fill in the gaps to your build. So, if you think of a basic skill as a resource generator or a spammable skill, and a core skill is either a damage cooldown or a resource spender, defensive skills are supposed to improve survivability. They're supposed to heal you, they're supposed to give you damage immunity, they're supposed to give you crowd control immunity, they're supposed to keep you alive longer. Utility tools are those niche things where, yes, they might cost resource, yes, they might have a cooldown, yes, they might primarily deal damage, but they're not your first damage option. So if you look at something like here, you know, you don't walk into combat as a barbarian, as a kick barbarian, and just kick somebody. Because you have to build up fury for it first. You don't just walk into a room as a sorceress, lay down Hydra, and then say, okay, I'm done, and walk out of the room. And let the Hydra do all the work. So, like, that's an example why I would consider most of these utilities. Obviously, there's exceptions. You know, Warcry, to me, is a defensive skill, which I'll explain that in a little bit. But these are your utility skills. And then the last category that doesn't really matter is ultimate skills. Because not every class uses ultimate skills. Not every, well, I shouldn't say not every class. Not every build uses ultimate skills. And the ultimate skills in this game, you can only run one. You can't run multiples. And you can't level them. You can't scale them at all. So you can't go 5 of 5. You can only go 1 of 1. And I'm yet to find a legendary or something that can go higher than 1 of 1. I would assume it's plausible, but I haven't personally seen it. I'm not commenting on that. Don't at me on that. It's just I haven't seen it. So, of the 4 skills that matter, most classes in the game, what determines their strength is their skills. Now, let's start with this. Part of the reason why Barbarian feels so good is because their basic core gameplay loop is very simple. Swing, swing, build resource, swing, swing, spend resource. Very simple. Most classes in the game are trying to get rid of their basic skills as quickly as humanly possible. And half the Barbarian community will tell you that too. There's quite a few high-level Barbarians that say, just put 2 points into lunge and then move on, and you can get all of your fury out of Rallying Cry, or all of your fury out of Ground Stomp, or all your fury out of XYZ. Where they're using their cooldowns to generate their fury instead, and they just do a bunch of burst damage with that fury, and then when the fury runs out and everything's on cooldown, they die. But, like, basic skills are not supposed to be these great options. They're always supposed to be a fallback. Like, oh shit, I'm out, I need to just do something so I don't die, so I can get some damage in. Barbarian doesn't have that problem, because all 4 of Barbarian's options are particularly good. All 4 of these have value in some capacity. Flay, which is one of the worst, it's a skill for one of the worst builds in the game, still has value because of Combat Flay. Because it builds thorns, and it's useful in the AFK Barbarian build, where you're just trying to get as much thorns as humanly possible, and you're trying to deal damage by just enemies hit you, enemies take 10 million points of damage and die. So this is valuable for that build. If you're running Thorns Barb, and you don't need this for damage or fury generation, it works fine. Then you have something like Frenzy. Frenzy has a very high attack speed that enables you to build fury faster off of it. So you don't have to rely on other tools for fury generation. It hits twice, so it gets 8 fury per hit, and it hits very quickly. And each time it hits, the attack speed goes higher and higher, you get a stack. But what other tangible benefit does it have? It has Combat Frenzy. You get 8% damage reduction per stack of Frenzy. You get 3 stacks of Frenzy, that's 24% damage reduction. A flat 24% damage reduction in combat at any time is pretty good. Then you have Bash. Bash has a guaranteed stun on it. Yes, there's some hoops to jump through, but it's a guaranteed stun. You hit an enemy 4 times, and your 5th one will be a stun. Guaranteed. So, just by putting 1 point into Bash, you can use it as a guaranteed crowd control option. It might not be particularly good, it might have some hoops to jump through, but it's there for crowd control. Lunge, again, is a movement tool, because the way it works is it will lunge you towards enemies that are away from you on the screen. So if my Barbarian is right here, and there's an enemy, I should go. Alright, if my Barbarian is right here, and if you see where the NPC is, with a little chat bubble above their head, in the, call it southeastern corner of the screen, I suppose. You can see that at all. If I were to press lunge right now, my character would dart like a dash towards him and attack him. And in your tree, the second upgrade that you get is you get a 2% maximum life heal when you hit that enemy, because they'll be healthy at that time. So you can get value out of all of your basic skills, which does make Barbarian feel good. Now, not every Barbarian wants to use basic skills, but it does make them feel good. I like Frenzy Barbarian. I like Bash Barbarian, even if it is a little slow. I like Lunge and Strike Barbarian, even if the auto-target on the ability annoys the shit out of me. These all have purpose for my build. I wouldn't take these out of those builds, even if I just drop it down to 1 out of 5. I would still carry it on my skill bar. And I don't have an AFK Thorns build Barbarian. Or a Bleed Barbarian, because Bleed sucks. Damage over time sucks. Most classes in the game don't have this. Sorceress and Necromancer especially, which are the 2 classes that are worse than Barbarian, they really struggle from this effect, because their basic skills, you almost don't want to use them. You're using them because you have to, not because you want to. Whereas Druid is very good in this regard, because Druid is very similar. All of their basic skills have a use. You can get value out of them consistently where they're not worth decasting. Now, every class has good core skills. All the classes have good core skills. That's kind of the point. They're fun to use. They deal a lot of damage. Barbarian is no exception to this. They have Whirlwind, which is what 90% of Barbarian players use, and the other 10% are Hammer of the Ancients or Upheaval. And if you're a masochist, you're running Double Swing and Rend, which are the worst options. 3 of the 5 are very good build-worthy options, which not every class can say. Fire kind of sucks. Lightning has Chain Lightning, which is underpowered but kind of fun. And Ice has Ice Shards. You know, you look at Necromancer. The Blood build is kind of fun. They have 2 viable options, and Bone Spear is good, but both the Shadow options kind of suck. Everything on Druid feels fun to play, or is good with legendaries. And, I mean, core skills are kind of the hard one to fuck up. Barbarian is no exception. Whirlwind is very strong. It doesn't require a lot of work to be good. Hammer of the Ancients is good. It doesn't require a lot of work to be good. You just need a solid damage weapon and 1 legendary aspect, and you're good to go. I think Whirlwind works. Whirlwind doesn't even need a legendary to be good. You can throw one on and it'll be good. Upheaval, same thing. You can throw it. Just needs a good, solid weapon, and you're good to roll, right? Double Swing's harder because it's not very good. The main gimmick with it is the enhanced Double Swing, where if you damage a stunned or knocked down enemy, you get your Fury cost back. So if you go stun, Double Swing, stun, Double Swing, and you're just chaining between stun and Double Swing back and forth, and you have this endless cycle of stun, Double Swing, it's pretty good. But outside of that, it's very gimmicky. It doesn't deal enough damage to compete with the other options. And then we have Rend, which is for the bleed build, and the bleed build sucks. There's nothing redeeming about this that I can really say. It's kind of the shit one. You're running it if you're full bleed, and even then you don't like it. Right? So these 2 classes are very hard to fuck up. However, here's where Barbarian starts to go downhill. Now, almost all the classes in the game are pretty much decided by their defensive and utility skills. If a class has good offensive options, like Necromancer, but terrible defensive options, they feel terrible to play because they don't have survivability. And if a class has good defensive options and good utility options, but their offensive options can either feel lackluster or require tons of legendaries to be good, like Druid. Druid's an example. They can feel sometimes bad to play. Barbarian is a pendulum that swings very wildly between feeling powerful and weak. And the main reason I discovered is its builds don't synergize well, and its skills, defensively and utility, are redundant. There's one set of skills that you run, and you win the game, and everything else is lesser. And that's really what makes Barbarian feel weaker. So let's talk about what you have for builds. Most builds are determined by either ultimates or key passives. And most classes are in this boat where their key passives suck or are mediocre, but the rest of their kit is good. This is something like Necromancer, for example. Necromancer's kit is good. Their key passives are very linear. Rogue has very good build, but their key passives are either suck or you're kind of into this one-and-done type strategy. Ultimates are kind of 50-50. Some classes have good ultimates, some classes don't have good ultimates, some builds run an ultimate, some builds like, meh, I don't really care. And part of the reason why Barbarian feels weak, if you're not running an ultimate ability, your class can kind of feel weaker because it feels like there's no payoff. Barbarian has lackluster builds. Because if you notice that there are 4 key passives here. Berserk is actually terrible. It is very powerful build to run, but the problem is it requires so much time and effort to get going. It requires a large amount of legendary aspects. It requires the key passive. It requires Wrath of the Berserker. And it requires skills that trigger berserking, because berserking is not something you can acquire naturally. You have to acquire it through a skill. What skills acquire you berserking? Obviously, Wrath of the Berserker does. There's an upgrade for Death Blow that gives it. There's an upgrade for Steel Grasp that gives it to you. There's a passive in the Brawling Tree, where Brawling Trees can give you berserking. There's War Cry, which first upgrade gives you berserking. There's the other passive for Lunge that applies off of crits only. There's the other passive off of Upheaval that can give you berserking. And then there's the berserking extender on Double Swing, where if you're already berserking, you can get 2 additional seconds of berserking if you use Double Swing. I don't really count that. So you have a very linear build that you run, which is basically Lunging Strike, Upheaval, Rallying Cry. You'll ignore that in a minute. You're going to ignore the Brawling Tree entirely, even though it's there. Death Blow, Steel Grasp, Wrath of the Berserker. That's your build for berserking. That is your best build for berserking, because it's giving you the most opportunities to trigger it and take advantage of berserk. The problem with berserking is the payoff isn't that great. Same thing, this is a walking arsenal barbarian. I've tried so hard to make this passive work. It's not good. It's a 10% damage bonus for each of the 3 types of damage that you can inflict. They're only up for 6 seconds. They don't reset if you add another type. And if you can get all 3 damage bonuses active, you need a legendary aspect to get a niche benefit, or you get 15% bonus damage. So you go up to 45% damage. And I've ran this, and I've kept all 3 of these. This build is literally designed to keep all 3 passives active at once. It's not worth it. I ended up switching to the bleed build, because the minor bleed skills that I have, which is literally off of Thorns damage, gives me a stronger benefit in this build. And the only ultimates I really run as a barbarian are either Gushing Wound, because it triggers off of Thorns damage, and Unbridled Rage, which is good for Upheaval and Hammer of the Ancients only. And it makes them into cooldowns almost, because the amount of Fury you need to generate is almost an entire bar of Fury. You have to easily generate 70 to 80% of your Fury bar for one cast. But it acts as an orbital nuke right in front of you. So these 2 passives are the only 2 passives that are really good in my opinion because of versatility. Yeah, berserking is great, but it requires 6 legendary aspects. It requires a dedicated build on it, and it's not fun to play most of the time. At least for me, because I have to constantly worry about getting berserk up and keeping berserk up. And Walking Arsenal is the same thing. Walking Arsenal requires a large... So that part of the game feels weak. Same thing, the ultimates feel weak. Call of the Ancients is fun. The cooldown's a bit long, given that it only lasts 6 seconds. But it is a good burst of damage. It basically gives you a shit ton of Fury. Like, the fact that Corlock gives you 10 Fury each time he damages an enemy with Frenzy. Oh my god. This build is good. And I ended up making this character into a Call of the Ancients style character. This one, yeah. Where the lucky hit chance, while you have Call of the Ancients up, Leap, Upheaval, and Whirlwind have a big chance to summon an Ancient. They perform the same skill. That's actually pretty good for this build. I liked playing with this. The problem that Wrath of the Berserker has is it's not Wrath of the Berserker from D3. It does not give you base damage increase. Wrath of the Berserker did in D3. This just gives you berserking for 5 seconds and unstoppable for 5 seconds. Ignore the second part, because the second part is conditional if you use basic skills. And you're only triggering it once. But the berserking is supposed to give you a 50% damage bonus, plus unstoppable for 5 seconds, but the cooldown is not long enough. Like, it's 60 seconds for 5 seconds of use realistically. It only works in Berserking build. I didn't like the Berserking build. I would pretty much just say it's a 60-second crowd control option. And Iron Maelstrom is just weak. They've buffed this to Kingdom Come. It's still weak. It can be a fun build. It feels more like a long cooldown damage skill in a Walking Arsenal build because of this, where dealing damage with an enemy after you swap weapons reduces the cooldown by 1 second. If you're running Walking Arsenal where you're swapping weapons all the time, that 45-second cooldown can be like 15 seconds. Not kidding. You can get that down to 15 seconds by playing the way the build wants. It's just not impactful enough to be an ultimate ability when I can run 3 shouts. And that's ultimately the problem that Barbarian has. Let's keep going with this list. Let's talk about the utility skills. The weapon masteries are things I would call utility skills. Rupture is very good. It's supposed to be the capstone of the combo for Blood build. Bleed build, Barbarian, is supposed to work like this. You go swing, swing, apply a bunch of build, swing, swing, apply even more build, rupture, remove all the build, big chunk damage. It's a 10-second cooldown. The cooldown is too long, and even if you max this out to 5 out of 5, you're like 7.5, 8 seconds. That is too long for the bleed build to be consistent. That's the main reason why I had to dump the bleed build. All your damage is in damage over time. It's not in main damage. So you have to be able to stay there and take hits. Which is funny because the rest of the bleed skills are good. The bleed key passive is very good. The hamstring, where bleeding affects slow enemies by 30%, is good. Because that combos with Tough as Nails, where enemies that trigger your thorns take bleeding damage. So if an enemy hits you with Tough as Nails 3 and Hamstring 3, you have guaranteed crowd control on any enemy that hits you, and you can trigger any crowd control effect off of that. If it's like when hitting an out crowd control enemy or damage crowd control enemies, it's very strong off of just these builds. Now there's other bleeds that are kind of effective, like there's the bleed on Whirlwind, although that's not as good as this. And then there's the bleed off of Lunging Strike, which is good for bonus damage, but it's not great. It's kind of just there. It's like you want random berserking or random bleeding, basically. But not including these two, you do have 4 ways, technically, to trigger bleed damage. And that makes bleed as a good alternate build, even though you're not using any bleed skills, which makes bleed feel very weak. Then you have things like Deathblow and Steel Grasp, which are clearly designed for Walking Arsenal. They're clearly designed for cooldowns that switch your weapon. Steel Grasp is incredibly inconsistent if it pulls enemies in. It is not a guaranteed pull. Makes sense because they don't want you to pull bosses to you and like just scorpion a boss away in team play. But it's inconsistent against non-bosses. It's inconsistent in the overworld. A Gorger, which is a common enemy type, or a Beast, which is a common enemy type that is bigger than your character, but still a common enemy type, it's not an elite, doesn't get pulled in by Steel Grasp. But a teeny tiny elite spider or plague maggot that's an elite gets pulled into you. That's inconsistent to me. So the pull's not the main reason you run it. 90% of people that run Steel Grasp are only running it for either vulnerable or berserking. And if you're running it for vulnerable, you're not going to run berserking because you want the 3rd charge. If you're running it for berserking, then the vulnerable is a nice bonus, but you're running it for the vulnerable. This is literally a skill that exists just to provide 2 status conditions. If you want the berserking, I guess it's good for that, but you're wasting one of your slots for that. If you want vulnerable, it's actually better to just run Pressure Point. Yes, it's a lucky hit chance, but it triggers incredibly consistently on Whirlwind. If you're Whirlwind or Double Swing, you're running Pressure Point because of how incredibly consistent it is. Or if you're like me and you're running multiple core skills, which most classes don't do. So there's no real reason to run Steel Grasp. Now, Death Blow is fun, but again, it's something that 90% of players aren't going to run because Barbarian's build is basically basic, core, 3 shouts, random skill. So unless this is taking up that random skill slot, it's not great. It's fun to use. Basically, it deals a massive chunk of damage to an enemy in front of you. If it kills that enemy, the cooldown resets. If it doesn't kill the enemy, it's a 15-second cooldown. Now, it triggers lucky hit chances a ton, and it deals double damage against bosses. So, even if you're going up against an elite, an aspect dungeon boss, or a world boss, something like that, you can get value out of it just by dealing big, chunky damage. Right? I have 5 points into the skill. It scales at 168% of my weapon damage, meaning it's dealing over 300% weapon damage to an enemy. It's a great skill to run, but the downside to it is if it doesn't kill something, it's lackluster. You can get Fury off of it, you can get Berserking off of it, but it's not great. And I didn't know if I was blocking that dude in while I was doing that. Happens from time to time. It's not a reliable skill. It's an RNG slot machine type skill. It's fun to play, but if you're trying to optimize your build as much as possible, you're not running it. Same thing if you look at your brawling skills, okay? I would call Kick is basically a core skill, because everybody that runs Kick is running Power Kick, where it consumes all of your Fury and deals burst damage. So now your style of play in this build is build, 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 Kick to get rid of Fury. Build, 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 Kick to get rid of Fury. It's not really being useful for anything. You can get a vulnerable off of it, which is good, which is nice, especially if you don't kill your target. You can follow up and kill them. The other brawling skills are movement, right? Leap and Charge are supposed to be movement skills. Charge, however, doesn't really travel that far. It's mostly, oh yeah, it makes you unstoppable, and you can get some bonus knockback and vulnerable off of it. But it's competing with 3 shouts to be useful. And the cooldown is relatively long for how ineffective it is. Now, Leap is a bit stronger. It does more damage. There's more legendary aspects around it. So if you have a couple legendaries, like I have a brawling build Barbarian that basically, you know, leap, kick type style of gameplay going back and forth. It is kind of fun. But on the surface, Leap isn't very good. It's good for generating Fury, because if you hit an enemy, you get 40 Fury. So you can kind of go like Rallying Cry, Leap, full Fury bar for a core skill, and never really have to worry about Fury. And as long as you have at least 1 point in of Fury, you can use Kick to trigger, to reset the cooldown on Leap, to generate more Fury. So if you want to ignore basic skills, a brawling skill tree is pretty good for that. The problem is, without a full brawling build, without a full Leap build, this feels very weak. And the brawling skills are competing with basic, core, and 3 shouts for being effective. Even if you look at the defensive options that are in the tree that aren't the shouts, Iron Skin is quite possibly one of the worst defensive skills in the game. It gives you a barrier of 50% of your missing life. So, if you have a health pool of 6,000 health, and you activate this preemptively, if you're only missing a little bit of health, you've basically wasted your cooldown. You get nothing out of it. Now, let's say worst case scenario. Let's say you're missing 50% of your health. So you have 3,000 health. You're going to get a barrier that gives you 1,500 health, because it's 50% of your missing life. We're missing 3,000 life, so we're getting a 1,500 barrier. That's good. It stays up for 5 seconds. Not a lot of things are going to deal that much damage to you. Here's the problem, though. It requires a legendary aspect for crowd control immunity. What it does is you can either get some Fortify off of it, which is good, or the heal, which you think is good, but it's not. it heals you for 10% of the barrier's original amount as life per second. So, in that scenario, we have 6,000 health, we're missing 3,000, the barrier gives us 1,500. That means you heal for 150 health per second. For 5 seconds. Meaning, we'll get 750 health, even though we're missing 3,000. It's nowhere near good enough to be a defensive skill. You're only using this if you're about to die. If there was an upgrade in this tree here, if Tactical Iron Skin was base, that'd be one thing. If this option, if either of these, the Fortify or the Heal, was base, it would be better. If one of these was Fortify, Iron Skin automatically activates when you take lethal damage. This effect can only happen once every 120 seconds, like Flame Shield's attunement is. It would be better. It could be a get out of jail free card on Barbarian, which Barbarian doesn't have a lot of. Like, Barbarian has great defensive options, they're all shouts. This skill is worthless. Ground Stomp is more utility than defensive. It's a guaranteed stun. It stuns for 4 seconds, and you get your choice of either small amount of fury or reduced cooldown of ultimates. If you don't run an ultimate, then you run the fury. And if you don't use a lot of fury, for whatever reason, you're running this. And you run Call of the Ancients, or Wrath of the Berserker. But, again, this skill is directly competing with the 3 shouts. And the problem with this is, there's a couple of niche builds for Ground Stomp and Stunning. There's a unique about it. But it doesn't really fit with what Barbarian wants to do. Barbarian wants to chain basic, spend core, activate 3 shouts, and be done. And all of the shouts are just so good. First off, you can increase the duration by 24% with 3 points off of this. That takes the duration of any of your shouts to 7.4 seconds, so 7.5 seconds. That means that any of the effects that they give you last 7.5 seconds. Next, there's Raid Leader. This means that each shout will heal allies, yourself included, for 1, 2, 3% of their maximum life per second. Now that doesn't seem like a long time, but remember that the shouts last 7.5 seconds. So a 3% passive heal for 7 seconds is okay, and it stacks. So if you have 2 shouts active, say Rallying Cry and War Cry active, that's 6% health per second for 7 seconds. If you have all 3 shouts up, that's 9% health per second for 7 seconds. That's pretty good. In addition, there's Guttural Yell. Shouts cause enemies to deal 4, 8, 12% less damage for 5 seconds. It's not great. It doesn't last the full duration of a shout, which makes it a little misleading. That's why I don't normally run it. And 12% damage isn't great. It's nice, but it's not... If it's scaled to like 20, 24%, like the Frenzy one does, that would be a little bit better. But what do the shouts give you? War Cry gives you bonus damage, and it either gives you Berserking or Fortify. But it's bonus damage for you and your allies for a good duration. So again, 7 seconds, 15% bonus damage, no points into it. Right? If you were to level this, you could get this extremely high. You can get this to 25%. And there is another one where the more enemies that are nearby, your damage bonus goes up 10%. Now, that makes that 25%. This is very good as a basic Barbarian build. It's just bonus damage. You might say, well, how is it defensive? Well, that's what the Fortify is for, and it's a shout. It triggers shout legendaries. It triggers these 2 shout passives. You have Challenging Shout. This is the weakest of the shouts. It taunts enemies. 40% damage reduction. That's not great, but the remaining effects are 20% bonus maximum life, and your choice of either bonus fury each time you take damage, or the main one, Thorns equal to 30% of your maximum life. This is good in AFK Barbarian build. This is good in general, because you stack this with Tough as Nails, you stack this with Hamstring, you stack this with Gushing Wounds, and now you have even more damage off of the bleed, even more crowd control. And the problem here is Rallying Cry. If you've noticed how the only other skill that I have mentioned that is reliable crowd control immunity, you have Charge. Leap doesn't work the way you think it does. You have Charge for Unstoppable, and you have you have Wrath of the Berserker. Call of the Berserker, if you will. Those two skills, and then Rallying Cry. Every Barbarian is running Rallying Cry. Not even for its main effect. Literally just for Unstoppable. I'm literally running it on every Barbarian build because it's unstoppable for 7.5 seconds. That's the only reason why I'm running it. You can make an infinite Barb build where you have the resource regeneration is insanely boosted. You have the tactical Rallying Cry where you get 20 Fury instantly. You get 20% increased resource generation. And you basically don't use your basic skills. You just pop Rallying Cry, you use other forms of Fury regeneration, and you just attack that way. I personally like strategic Rallying Cry for the Fortify. I think the Fortify keeps you alive longer. But for this build specifically, since I have 2 core skills, I'm running the tactical Rallying Cry. But this skill right here is the #1 reason why Barbarian feels weak. Now, one of the reasons why Barbarian does feel good is actually kind of interesting. So, if you look at your core stats, right? Each one of these, Strength, Intelligence, Willpower, and Dexterity, is assigned to a particular class. Dexterity is the main stat for rogues. Now, any class can benefit from the crit chance and the dodge chance, but if you're a rogue, you get an extra benefit. Druids are primarily based around willpower. Any class can take advantage of overpower and healing and resource generation, but druids get bonus damage. Intelligence is the primary class for necromancers and sorceresses. Now, it gives you increased resistance to all elements, which is incredibly shit. However, this is good for those classes because they get bonus damage. Part of the reason why Barbarian has such strong survivability is because Strength increases armor gains. So the more strength you have, the more armor you have. The more armor you have, the more damage reduction, and the less your life is damaged. Meaning, a 1,000 health Barbarian with 3,000 or 4,000 armor can survive longer than a 2,000 health druid with 2,000 armor because of how it works. In addition to this, strength is what increases Barbarian skill damage. So your Barbarian, as you increase your strength, not only is your armor going up for survivability, but your damage is going up for your skill-based damage. The reason why Barbarian feels weaker is because they feel boring. All Barbarians are this combo style of play around burst damage. Build, 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 chunk down with Fury. Build, 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 chunk down with Fury. Either that or build Fury off of 1 or 2 skills, spend it all in 1 or 2 skills. Build off of 1 or 2 skills, spend it. The build variety is there, but when you play it, it's not good. I tried to run Berserking. It's not fun. It's effective, but it's not fun. I've tried to run Bleed. It's neither fun nor effective. I have a Brawling Barbarian. It's fun. It's not effective. I have a Bludgeon Shout Barbarian. It's boring, but it never dies. I have a Call of the Ancients Walking Arsenal build. It's fun, but it's weaker. And it requires a lot of work. The other main thing that I want to end this video on, in terms of talking about Barbarian, well, let's do 2 things to end the video. One is expertise, because the expertise system is very shit. 2 is what do I want to see buffed. Let's look at what skills I want buffed. The bleed damage build needs to have a stronger base damage dealing in it than it does. The damage over time is the primary goal. I get that. But it has to be a bit stronger, or it has to get a rework to how bleed damage is applied. Like, if you apply more bleed damage to a target to where their remaining health bar would bleed out, they should die after like half the time. So if I apply one hit of flay to an enemy and they would die in that 5 seconds, it should get cut down to 2.5. Whether you change a passive skill, like change the key passive like Gushing Wounds to meet that, or if you make it to where whenever a bleeding enemy dies from bleed damage that was directly inflicted from either, say, rend or flay. If direct damage from one of these two skills inflicts the lethal bleeding damage, then the bleeding damage should be cut from 5 seconds to like 1.5, 2 seconds. Frenzy, I think, is fine. I would like it if this option right here was at 3 stacks of Frenzy, you have a lucky hit chance to trigger Berserking. I would prefer that. Bash, I just want a little bit of an attack boost with a one-handed weapons. If you're dual wielding. Lunge, I think, is fine. Whirlwind is fine. Hammer is fine. Upheaval. I wish that these two skills would be different, because Upheaval can use any two-handed. I wish that one of these was two-handed bludgeon, one of these was two-handed slashing. Give you a bit more of an option as a barbarian. Double swing needs a damage buff to it. That's all I can really say. Either that, or like have a wider attack range. Ground Stomp needs another skill, but here, instead of increased duration by 1 second. Either that, or make it so that the stun duration goes up as you level the skill. So you could drop this down to 2 seconds, and give it a half a second for every point you put into it. So if you level it to level 5, you get a 4.5 second stun. Rallying Cry shouldn't be the only unstoppable that's any good. I already talked about Iron Skin. I think Challenging Shout is fine. War Cry, to me, could use a little bit of a buff, but I don't want to buff the shouts anymore. They're already too fucking good. Kick. I could maybe say using Kick similar to Bone Spirit, where the Fury cost is per point of Fury, or the bonus damage is per point of Fury, instead of per 10 Fury, and just drop down the bonus. Or you could scale that 20% up when you scale up Kick by putting more points into it. Charge just needs some legendary aspects for it. It needs something more to it. Leap needs just a little bit more to it. I think it's fine. Death Blow needs a way to reduce its cooldown reliably. Maybe a legendary aspect. Like, if Death Blow inflicts more than 50% of a target's health, of an elite's health, as when it deals damage, like the cooldown is reduced to 10 seconds. Rupture needs a much lower cooldown. Steel Grasp needs a much better set of conditions, or just rework this entirely. You could maybe rework this similar to making it an imbuement like Rogue, where the next attack that you use that specifically uses a one-handed or either of your two-handed weapons, right? Because Charge and Leap don't really use that. Charge, Leap, Kick, they don't, Ground Stomp, they don't really use that. But the next skill that you cast that use that hits at like 50% further distance. It swings outward, something like that. You could rework it something like that, but this needs a complete rework. This is trash. Call the Ancients is fine. Either the cooldown goes down to 45 seconds, or the duration goes up to, say, 8 seconds, and I'm happy. Wrath of the Berserker needs a flat damage bonus on it. 20, 25%. It needs a flat movement speed bonus on it, 10, 15%. The fact that it triggers berserking isn't enough. If I'm not running a berserking build, it's worthless. Iron Maelstrom just needs more buffs, more damage buffs. Could make it trigger some niche effects, maybe. Like, if your two-handed bludgeoning weapon kills an enemy, gets a bonus effect. If your two-handed slashing weapon kills an enemy, gets a bonus effect. If your dual-wield weapons kill an enemy, there's bonus effect. Something similar like that. Or just make this fucking upgradable and be done with it. Be one of the only legendaries that's upgradable. Key passives need some rework. I think the Unbridled Rage could use a little bit of a damage bonus. Maybe 150% instead of 135% bonus damage. Other than that, it's fine. Gushing Wounds could use a rework if it's for bleed only. Otherwise, make it so that Thorns doesn't trigger it, but then that renders it useless. Walking Arsenal needs a complete rework. I don't think a flat 10% damage buff is strong enough. The legendary aspects for it aren't strong enough. Oh wow, bonus lucky hit chance. Oh wow, bonus this chance. Oh wow, bonus fury generation. It's not good. You need, like, different unique bonuses. Like, hey, if you have 2 of these bonuses up, you get this bonus. If you have 3 of these bonuses up, you get this bonus. If you keep all 3 of these bonuses up for X amount of time, then you get this bonus. As opposed to just flat damage buff. And then last but not least, Berserk needs an easier method of triggering. Like, Berserk should, in my opinion, Berserk works best if there is a chance that a skill, like if you use a skill a consecutive amount of times or for a consecutive duration, it triggers berserking, because that could open up Frenzy Whirlwind. Frenzy, if you use, 5 or 8 consecutive casts of Frenzy, it triggers Berserk for 5 seconds. If you use Whirlwind consecutively for 4 or 5 seconds, it triggers Berserking. It's not currently in the game that way. I think that would be a nice buff. The last system to touch on is Expertise. The problem to me that Expertise has, and if you look at how this character is built, right? This character, I have a little bit of expertise in everything. This system is only designed for Walking Arsenal Barbarian. How most Barbarian, if you didn't know, is the only class that gets access to 4 weapons. They have 4 weapons. They don't have to choose between, do I run a 2-handed weapon for the damage and the bonus to the affix, or do I run the 1-handed and an offhand for bonus damage? Now, Rogue gets 3 because they get a 2-handed bow or crossbow, and they get their 2 daggers. But Barbarian is guaranteed 4. Most players, when they make a build, like if you're Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian, you run a 2-handed bludgeon, and your other 3 options are for legendary affixes. If you're a slashing barbarian, whether you're Whirlwind, Bleed, or Upheaval, you're running a 2-handed slasher, and your other 3 slots are legendary aspects. If you are the 1% double swing frenzy barbarian, you have 2 one-handers, and the other 2 slots are for beefy legendary affixes. Now, there's nothing wrong with that style of play. Problem is that you're only going to be leveling 1 or 2 of these. Another thing that's a problem to me is, look at this. Alright? Ignore the one-handers for a minute. Look at your 2-handers. 2-handed axe and 2-handed slashing are slashing weapons. Pole arm is a slasher. There is no bludgeoning pole arm. I know of bludgeoning pole arms in real life. The Kanabo is a Japanese samurai giant club. It is 4 to 5 feet long. It weighs 40 to over 100 pounds. Solid bamboo, metal studs in it. Smack, shit ton of damage. That is a weapon that exists in real life. It is a pole arm. It's not a it's a bludgeoning pole arm. There are no bludgeoning pole arms, which means if you are a bludgeon barbarian, you will get 2-handed mace expertise and nothing else, which is lucky hit chance of 10% to gain 2 fury when you hit an enemy, And you get the rank 10 bonus where you get increased critical strike damage while berserking. That's it. So, if you're Bludgeon Barbarian, this is the one thing you level. If you're a Slashing Barbarian, these three are the only three you level. Which, this one is good, just because it's bonus damage. That's really the only thing about this. Polearm is nice if you have the lucky hit chances, or if you're healthy a lot. This can be good. A 10% flat damage while healthy is great. And then this one right here, which is bonus vulnerable damage, is good if you're constantly triggering vulnerable. Now, the way this works is you get to use the benefit of a technique while it's active. If you don't have a weapon that's active, you assign it to your technique slot, and you get that benefit at any time. Here's the problem. The only way you level these is by dealing damage with them, with skills that use them. If you don't use your one-handers at all, you will never get these three leveled. If you don't use slashers at all, two-handed slashers at all, you will never get these three leveled. And if you don't use a two-handed bludgeon at all, you'll never get this one leveled. So automatically it's restrictive and forces a walking arsenal build. Now, if you notice right now, I have a two-handed bludgeon, I have a one-handed axe, I have a one-handed sword, and I have a two-handed axe. Meaning, I need to equip either the pole arm or the two-handed sword to get value out of these that I've already leveled. Now, the downside is that not a single one of these bonuses is really great. Critical strike against injured is meaningless. Now, all of these get a rank 10 bonus if you can level it up to rank 10, like this one. This gets both the bonuses. The problem to me is that it should be closer to the spirit boons that Druid has. Now, when I talked about the spirit boons for Druid, I said these needed to upgrade. I think an upgrade system here is close. What I would do, though, is I would give a third aspect. So the way, to me, this should work is that I would increase the amount of experience that's required to get these bonuses, for one. That's the first thing I would do. And I would make it so that at level 3 is when you get your first bonus. From level 1 to level 3, you get no bonus with that weapon. At level 3, you trigger the first effect. That could be something like, you know, this mace right here is the lowest option that I have. So, increased damage to stunned enemies. That would be the first trigger. Then the second trigger could be something like the rank 10 bonus, the lucky hit chance. You could make it to where each of these weapons has a lucky hit chance, and I would be perfectly fine with that. If all of these were lucky hit triggers as a second effect, I'd be fine with that. And then at level 10, you get your capstone for that weapon, where it's something much more dramatic. It would act almost like a mini passive skill. This, to me, would be a better system and encourage me to go out of my way to either use or equip different types of weapons. This character is level 53. I have one that's level 10, and that's pretty much because I always have a sword active. My two-handed bludgeon barbarian only has two-handed mace expertise. My two-handed slasher only has these three, and they're all around level 7 or level 8. So the problem is, this system right here is inherently flawed, and is inherently designed for one barbarian build. One. If you play other barbarian builds, you do not get to take advantage of this system, and that feels very restrictive to me as a player. As a player, I should be able to get more of the benefits of the system. The system is in place, but unless I deviate how I want to play to how the game wants me to play, I don't really get that benefit. I do wish that there was a deeper progression mechanic to this. The other thing too, so look at my one-handed sword, right? Let's say I want to get another one of these bonuses leveled up. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to just drop my sword? This sword is the highest damage single hand weapon that I have, am I supposed to drop this weapon and just use another axe off the ground or another mace off the ground to level that? That doesn't feel like a fair use of the skill. Particularly when this is a level 53 character. 90% of the loot that is currently on this character right now is going to be dropped. The last note that I'm going to end on, by the way. It should be this tab. Yeah, this tab. Okay. This is a unique. Uniques cannot have their stats changed outside of upgrading them. You cannot re-roll the affixes. You cannot remove or change the legendary aspect on it. That's what makes it unique. I have gotten 3 Barbarian uniques that dropped for this particular character. I sold all 3 of those uniques because they're trash. They were not game-breaking builds for me. They weren't even things I could chuck in the stash. This unique is good because this is for a fire sorceress. The name of the tab is non-active builds. This is gear for builds I don't currently have, but would like to make in the future. So, I have this staff. This staff is for a fire sorceress. Okay? I don't have a unique for Barbarian. I sold all 3 of them because I needed the gold. It's worth a shit ton of gold. You see how much a unique is worth. Uniques are worth at least 100k in gold. So they're more valuable for me to sell than salvage. Here's the thing. In my opinion, a unique is something that should level with the player. Now, that might seem stupid, because uniques are supposed to be endgame content that change how a build works. But the way I view them, at this stage of the game, I'm not changing how my build works. I'm not going to spend the 150,000 gold or the 100 and something million gold that it's going to take to re-roll the Paragon in order to get a build designed around a unique I'm not using. I got unique pants, unique boots, and a unique sword yesterday. The unique sword was detrimental to my build. The unique boots were okay, but they weren't double dodge boots. And I exclusively run boots with increased evade charges. I'm just hardcore into that. Pants and boots have these little side effects here. Now, the bonus effect on the pants I don't really care about, because that only activates when you're injured 90% of the time. And I try not to get injured, but it's nice on occasion. I couldn't use them for my build. I couldn't chuck them in the stash for other characters because they didn't fit builds for other characters. Those were the first 3 world drops of uniques that I got, besides the... where is it? Besides the Mother's Embrace ring that everyone gets from beating Lilith. Which by itself is not very good. To me, how I would change uniques... This is not a Barbarian specific issue, but I'm just chucking it in here if you're still here an hour into the video. Uniques shouldn't be upgradable at a blacksmith until you hit level 100. The way I would do it is that uniques will passively increase in item power and level each time you level up. So, let's say you roll at level 50, you get a unique. It should have a low item power. Every time you level up, all of your uniques, whether they're equipped in your inventory or in your stash, get 5 item power. Okay? That means that every 10 levels you get, you are increasing an item power by 50. So you could start it at, say, item power of 500, and it scales up to 750 max. And at level 100, at that point, you can take it to the blacksmith, and you can upgrade it 5 more times, if you want to. That, to me, is how I would make uniques. Since uniques are account-bound, non-tradable. They're only use is either equipped, sold, or salvaged. And a lot of the uniques in the game feel very weak. So my advice is that uniques are specific to account level or character level. Then I wouldn't be trashing every unique that I see if it doesn't fit my build or a future build I plan to make.